I'm here with Ashor with CPD Consortium, our Deputy Minister of Finance. Ashor, congratulations. Well done. Your family must be super proud of your position. Can you just briefly tell us about your background and your special journey, how you got here?
Sure. So I joined the Democratic Alliance when I was fairly young, in 2006, I think, in October 2006, and have been in and around and actively involved in politics one way or another since then. Went to university at Wits, got a BSc, got an honours, got elected to the city council here in Ekurhuleni for a period of time, then was elected to the provincial legislature, did my MBA at Wits, was elected to parliament in 2019, served in finance committees all the way through and various kinds of finance, public accounts, and those sorts of committees all the way through. I finished my master's in corporate strategy at Gibbs and then international business. And I suppose when the election results came the way they did, and the DA looked at who was best to put into the Treasury, I fit the bill. So here we are, in a very, very short summary.
It's a beautiful introduction. Thank you. I mean, where our normal mortals sit, your job must be incredibly complex. I think we've got a rule that we should never criticize something that somebody does if we don't have a better recommendation. How difficult is your position?
Look, this is South Africa's first genuine multi-party government where no party lacks a parliamentary majority. And it was always ever going to be difficult. And that comes with the territory. I mean, once all of my politics colleagues say to me very simply that if you don't have an appetite for uncertainty, don't get into politics. If you are not good at taking criticism, don't get into politics, and so on, because that's you're under the microscope all the time. But I think more critically, of course, is that policy in the government is a contested space, and that does make it difficult. Of course, different parties have different positions on different things, and within that, taking off my party political hat and then putting on my hat as deputy minister, you've got to say what is the most rational, growth-orientated set of solutions that we can come up with that will deliver the most good for the country. Might not always be from my party. It could be from elsewhere. It could be from civil society and so on. But you have got to take this contested space, the battle of ideas, and make sure that in the executive role, the best ideas win. And of course, everyone thinks that they have the best ideas. So it's not as easy as that. And you will always be criticized, but that comes with the job.
So, I mean, if we obviously live in a very uncertain world, and South Africa is an extremely small part of that uncertain world. What are the parts that you think we should, the kind of low-hanging fruit that we should go after? If I don't want to compare you with other departments, but if you take, for example, the market's perception around Leon Schreiber, Minister of Home Affairs, the perception is that he's achieved quite a lot in a small space of time. Things are better. Do you feel that your portfolio, you're also on track for those quick wins?
So I think the critical thing to understand about a treasury is that it's not a delivery department, it's a policy department. And so you don't get quick wins. You've got to deal with long-term structural problems, and it's not sexy, it's not attractive, but you have got to sit with the economic policy team, as we do all the modeling and forecasting, and say what, at the end of 5 years, will deliver the most good for the most South Africans. And there are departments like Home Affairs and so on where there are things that have just been backlogged for so long that you can find the quick wins, and then while you're dealing with the systemic problems. But Treasury generally is a very well-run place. So it's renowned. It's considered a good department. Well, there's no incidences of major corruption and so on. It's a good run place. So you can't do those kinds of quick wins. The technically competent staff and so on. So when you get into the Treasury, responsibility is very different. It's long-term. So what are we looking at in terms of long-term thinking? Obviously, there's Operation Vulindlela and trying to sort out energy. And you asked about low-hanging fruits and what should we focus on in this turbulent environment. The first is energy, first and foremost. If we don't get energy in South Africa sorted, we will never deliver growth. It is central to growth. Now, it's two things on energy. The first is the stability of supply, and we know load shedding and so on has hurt, but it's also stability of pricing. Since 2008, electricity prices have gone up more than 200%, whereas real price in the economy have gone up just over 100%. Now, when you consider that, it tells you that the core driver of inflation and so on is energy, and that the cost of energy is crowding out business decisions in the economy because it's outstripping inflation quite significantly. And so instead of investing in your business or hiring, you are spending more money on energy. So solving those two problems. And so we can do the policy work, and obviously the various government departments and ESCOM need to execute. And you see things like the Electricity Regulation Act, and now with Operation Vulindlela, the move towards creating a competitive energy market is very important. But you don't create a competitive energy market overnight. It's institutional. Similarly, Transnet and the fact that the ports are costing the economy, by one study, 357 billion rand a year in economic output, tells you that there's a big problem. So those kinds of domestic things. The other thing, of course, we can pull as a lever and we're working on is what can we do in local government, which is where a lot of state failure sits. And one of the programs we're working on is something called Metro Trading Services Reform. And what we are doing, starting with the metros, is changing the way they plan and budget around your critical services, starting with water. And what we're doing is requiring municipalities, with some incentive funding from the World Bank, to ring fence their water entities and then the revenue. So right now, when you pay for your water, that money can be used across anything in the municipality, anything, politicals, advisors, staff, cost of employees. And what you've seen is in many municipalities, the investment into the services has declined, but cost of employees has skyrocketed. What we're trying to do is make sure that the services become sustainable, move to a utility model, and so protect those kinds of services. These things are not sexy. These things are not going to blow the lights out right now. But as you implement them and see them through to conclusion, you will then get better results and hopefully, for example, stable water supply municipalities.
When we talk about tax policy, South Africa has often been criticized that if you look at that, tax is not used enough as a tool to be an enabler to achieve certain objectives. So if you, for example, look at budgets from the US, UK, Australia, Mauritius even though it might be controversial, some of the recommendations, there's a very clear alignment between tax policy and objectives. And I think in South Africa, I mean, there was a little bit of a tax initiative in terms of solar, but that was just for the panels, obviously not for the, for the inverters or the batteries, etc. But we don't really have a proud track record of using tax as an enabler to direct spend. Is that something that's on the radar for you?
So I think that the critical thing to understand is that you can use tax policy to get outcomes when you have fiscal space. In the current environment, where you've had anemic growth for 15 years, your fiscal space is extremely limited. And so I think that the critical question is, how do you limit tax increases in this environment? In the medium term and the longer term, you've got to then say, how do you use tax policy to get good outcomes? Absolutely, I agree there 100%. Certainly something I think about a lot. Of course, when I speak about some of the tax incentives that exist already, there are vested interests, of course, because once you create an incentive, people latch onto it and use it. And even if it's not producing the outcomes you want, there's always going to be a lobby for it. So I'm not going to get into that specifically, but that's also the risk on trying to create a tax incentive for a purpose that it becomes permanent, because an entire industry is built up around it as a consequence, even if it's not producing outcomes, or if the outcomes are negative. And so it becomes very difficult to undo tax incentives in that sense. So really, for me, the critical thing is, how do you limit tax increases? How do you simplify tax? And how do you maximize compliance within a simplified system? And if we can do that and reduce the burden of tax administration and so on, I think that would be far better in the current environment, considering our constraints. Better for revenue, better for taxpayers, better for tax compliance, and so on, to do that. Every time there is a review of tax policy to simplify it, of course, it becomes more complicated. So you don't want to go down that path again. But you do want a stable tax system that is predictable, that gives markets forward guidance. And if we can do that with the constraints that we face and deliver on a couple of things, debt reduction for the states, running a primary fiscal surplus so that we spend less than we take in revenue, a non-interest expenditure, those sorts of things are critical levers. And if we can meet those, I think the fiscal space over the next 10 years opens up to start creating the targeted tax tools that we need. But right now, the focus is debt reduction and building up fiscal space.
If we take a site, for example, that was just given the tax accounting officer designation, which allows tax practitioners to also sign off, basic accounts up to a certain level and offer that one-stop shop. I mean, that is a move towards increased regulation and increased accountability. There's a lot of places of fiscal leakage, but that often happens in the unregulated space. So whilst we're not for too much regulation, there is a bit of a perception sometimes that the good guys are being overly regulated, and perhaps with the problem sits there's no regulation there. What is your view in terms of the level of regulation? Should it be made more wide, and the level of enforcement of that regulation?
Yeah. So I think that the key thing about regulation is it firstly going to produce a good outcome? And secondly, is it easy to comply with? Or does it create an undue burden of compliance? And where it creates an undue burden of compliance, of course, my door is always open and the Treasury team is always willing to listen to what are the issues and what are the problems that create a heavy burden of compliance that is unfair in a given sector industry. And if it's not producing the outcomes, and if it is creating a heavy burden of compliance that takes up far too much working hours and so on, then of course it's an area ripe for reform, because ultimately regulation must be rational and produce good outcomes. If it doesn't fit that bill, then it's not fit for purpose. I think that's how I view it.
Thank you. A final question for tax practitioners. A lot of tax practitioners work with a lot of South Africans moving abroad or working abroad. And there's obviously a lot of negativity around that, because you have South Africans with their families here and parents are working abroad or part of family moves abroad. We also see the opposite being true. We see a massive movement of foreign nationals back to South Africa, or South Africans back, especially the Western Cape, where they say, listen, it's still the best quality of life and so forth. What is your message to tax practitioners and young professionals and South Africans in general? Just why do you believe South Africa Inc. is still a great place to stay and invest in your future?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, the global environment has changed as well. So it's not what it was 5 years ago. It's a lot more uncertain all over the world. And so that being South Africans, we're very good at dealing with uncertainty. We're very good at dealing with institutional voids. And so we tolerated it here and we've learned to live with it here. If you're looking to escape that, you're not going to escape that overseas anymore, unfortunately. It's just how the global political environment has changed. For better or for worse, it is what it is. So the core of the question is South Africa worth giving up? And of course, absolutely not. We've all gotten so much out of this country. We've all had so much opportunity. If you're a tax practitioner, a young professional in South Africa, we have all been able to build lives here that we value. We all have our linkages here. Ultimately, no other place will feel like home. And that's the crux of it. So what we have got to do is work to build it. But more importantly, we've got to fight for it. We can't just give up. We can't just accept decline. We can't accept decay. We can't accept that things are negative. We have got to go and fight, and we've got to get involved, put our hands up in community organizations, in cleanup campaigns, and everything that we can to turn around the decay that we see in parts of the country and to get things working again. And of course, it is true there are lots of South Africans coming back, and it always warms my heart when they do.
Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
The audience was thoroughly impressed with your vision and how well you spoke. And I hope SITE is all about, as the largest recognized controlling body for tax practitioners, we are into long-term relationships, and I know there's a very good relationship between SITE and Treasury, And thank you for being here and investing your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.